an amazing point in the pastime here, one could say, really the climax of the story of Bali Maharaj and his wonderful surrender. And now he will be responding to his spiritual master. So as we know in the previous chapter, Sukracharya had given his very convincing arguments, actually, about why it is unwise to sacrifice for the spiritual cause if it will hamper one's material life. And very convincing arguments, in fact. And to tell you the truth, arguments that most people actually nowadays confirm to be very accurate. Even those who are religious will also say, even someone actually told me the other day that, you have to be careful about being too religious, too spiritual. It shouldn't be 100%. You should have a portion of your life, but it shouldn't be such a 100% thing all the time, every day. And it's actually a little bit intimidating for people. What to speak of sacrificing your material prosperity. So that was Shukracharya's argument, was saying that even if you make a religious vow, at a certain point you will be, if you see that it will hamper your financial stability or your prosperity, your material happiness, then you are allowed to forsake your vow, because that vow is not binding. Because who can expect you to sacrifice material happiness for the sake of religious growth, for the sake of God? And it is very interesting because in one sense, what we see in spiritual life is that Krishna also makes it clear, that according to the way in which people approach him, he will reveal himself accordingly. So therefore there are, in fact, a variety of ways in which one can approach God and different platforms upon which one can have an exchange with the Lord. But according to the approach, one will have also a similar experience. And to have the full experience of God requires full faith and full surrender. And therefore we see that the great pure devotees in the world are those individuals who have given everything. And in one sense, that's what makes this movement so unique. And what makes the movement also so unique is not just that we see it is populated by people who have given who have had the opportunity to give, who have given everything, and who are therefore greatly inspiring personalities. But also it is a movement that gives people the opportunity to give everything. Like even if you want to give everything, who is willing to? Where will you go? Who is willing to give you that opportunity? We even see, like for example, say like moving into a temple is an interesting experience, because then in one sense you have an experience of full-time dedication. But it's not easy to get that opportunity even now. There's not many places that don't even want to do it anymore, because it's quite a hassle actually to have people move in full-time. It's like getting a cow. Like everyone wants milk, but if you get a cow, it's a lot of work actually to maintain that. And it's like, geez, it requires a lot of planning. And in the material world, in the modern world, it's difficult to have a cow because they're very expensive. Land is expensive. So similarly, it's same with people. It's easier to have machines and these kind of things. With other people, it's difficult to facilitate surrender. So, and even as we see, it's like Bali Maharaj is making the point here that this is a unique opportunity that has come. Some of the opportunity has come now for me to see if I can give everything. And all of us also, to a certain point, also have that opportunity to see how much we can give. Now, obviously, the principle of what we're supposed to give at this Krishna consciousness, the most important thing is to give your full attention, your full consciousness. That's really what is required. If we look at Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's life, we see that he would advise many different people in different ways. Some people are advised to enter into the renounced order of life, but in more than one occasion, he also advised people to stay within their position. You see, when he was touring South India, he met this wonderful Brahmana, what's his name, Kurma, a Brahmana in South India, who then wanted to leave everything behind, leave his family, his whole life, and just tour with Lord Chaitanya. And Lord Chaitanya told him, no, you just stay exactly where you are. But, you fill your life with the worship of Krishna. So the primary sacrifice we see in spiritual life is not really so much your status or the order within which you live. That's not really the primary thing. The real sacrifice to make is your absorption. What are you absorbed in? That is what Krishna wants. For example, you see, it is about giving time and energy that should be sacrificed to the Lord. And that is the most difficult thing. So it means taking out, especially those things that we are absorbed in and not really required. That's the painful things to give up. So many useless things we devote our time and our energy to. So that really is the sacrifice. And one can stay in whichever order of life one is meant to be in. But it is there that everything has to be given in that sense. But here, Bali Maharaj, somehow or other, he had the unique opportunity to sacrifice everything, to even give all his property and all his money to Krishna. And what is also interesting to understand is that Bali, he was not a pure devotee. That's to be understood. Bali Maharaj was not, he was still actually a fresh demon, one could say. He still was very much, it was like he was fully a materialistic person. But somehow or other, when he saw Vamana Dev, there was some faith that was awakened within him due to his relationship with Prahlad Maharaj. So somehow he had some faith that this is okay, and he was attracted to Vamana Dev. But he was not completely now in a pure devotional mindset. And it is very fascinating when we hear his arguments for why to make the sacrifice, why to give everything to Vishnu. He's not saying, you will see in this purport, nowhere does he say that because of pure love of God, because one purely loves Krishna and therefore one gives everything to Krishna. No, he had a whole other line of thought that was going. But it is interesting that this line of thought is important because in our own approach to spiritual life, in one sense, we know what is the best thing to do. But then the second step is to find the motivation that will help us do it. And one has to sometimes be creative, and one has to also sometimes work with the motivations that you have. So each of us, we are naturally born with certain things that move us, certain motivations. Like you can see some people by nature, by their material conditioning, they're very competitive. It's amazing. Like to win is a thing for them. Like the moment there's a competition, even if it's just, you see sometimes like, go with some friends and you're like, oh, maybe we should go play some tennis. And then like, oh, yes, let's go play some tennis. And then you go, and then you see some people that is like, they're friends. But then once the game starts, they're just like, they become very so serious and focused. And you can see this guy really wants to win, even though it's, it's just like a little friendly game of tennis. So we see that some people are moved by the desire to win. Other people aren't. Like other people don't really care at all. They're not at all moved by this desire to win. It doesn't really stimulate them. But then other people you see, for example, they're very much, sometimes people are very much moved by their appearance, like how they appear in society, their status, how they look. They're very particular about how they dress. They're very much moved by this, by looking and appearing a certain way. It's not bad. It's just you're conditioned in that sense. You're very conscious of it. And for example, when you do things, you're willing to do so many things based on this desire to appear in a certain way. And then you have other people, and they're just completely ignorant. They always look like they just got out of bed, and they just they're not at all even thinking about how they're looking. So we see that in our material conditioning, we have these certain things that motivate us naturally. And what is fascinating here with Bali Maharaj is somehow he was engaging his actual natural, somehow found a way to connect his material conditioning, was pushing him in one sense also to Krishna. Because his argument that he was making is that the highest grade, the highest good, the highest material goal in one sense is fame, to become glorious. That is what he saw to be, that's the thing. That's even more important than money or wealth. Who cares about that? Fame is eternal. And now for us, it's not something we can always relate to, but we see it time and time again. Like look, for example, at someone like Alexander the Great. Why did he do it? Why did he conquer the world? Why did he go through that? If you have to understand also what that meant then. If you think about these campaigns in which they went to, they would go for years, like 7-8 years. They would go into foreign countries. And, there's very interesting cases, for example, where Alexander the Great, where actually just before he wanted to go into India, to cross, usually the big thing is when they cross a river. When you cross a river with 2, 3, 400,000 people, it's a big trip. There's no bridges, so you can imagine just what that means. It's like a massive endeavor to cross that river. And then also once you cross, you can't go back, So you can imagine psychologically, if you have this army and they come, if they decide, okay, now we're going to cross this river, because generally in the ancient world, also the rivers were the marking, the borders between countries. It was the natural demarcations. Even in India now, many states and kingdoms, they were actually they were bordered by rivers. So if you make that cross into that river, then the guys knew, now it means like another few years, we're going to go there now, and it's going to be a whole thing. So that was the natural point also, which you have to decide, am I going to turn back or am I going to go forward? So we see that at that point when Alexander wanted to cross that river, his men wanted to mutiny. They actually wanted to run back, and they were very upset. And then there's this classic, one of the great speeches, where he had to then basically took off all his armor and he stood in front of all his soldiers, and he started to show them all the various scars that he had gotten over the last how many decades, whatever, of conquering the world. And he was telling them, you remember, this is here, this is here, this is here. And then he told the soldiers, he said, so I have never asked you to do anything that I have not done myself. So therefore I'm asking you now, come with me and let us conquer India. And then everybody got riled up and they did it. But you see how much pain and effort was exerted into conquering such a big place. Why did he do it? Why did he do it? The same can be asked of these people who become in the world of business. After you have made your first billion, why do you need more than $1 billion? What will you get from having 2 billion or 3 billion? It is completely just a number. Whether you have 4 billion or whether you have 100 billion, what does it really make a difference in your life practically? It's like really nothing much will change about your standard of living. But we see that people go for glory. That is the thing, for glory and for fame. Like Alexander the Great is famous as the person who conquered the known world. And that's what he wanted. He wanted a certain sense of immortality by becoming famous. So Bali Maharaj also was a Kshatriya, and he was moved by this idea. He was somehow, he was excited by this idea of becoming glorious by sacrificing everything. And we see many of the kings, even when Krishna went to see Jarasandha, and when he and Bhima went to fight Jarasandha in the Mahabharata war, then Jarasandha was ready to give everything to the Brahmanas. Even though he was a demon, quote-unquote demon, very bad person. He was very much into human sacrifice and all kinds of weird things. But still he was into sacrificing to the Brahmanas. But not for love of God, not for gaining love of Krishna, but for glory. It was a glorious thing. It showed your mettle. It showed that you were, and you gained great reputation by being charitable. So therefore, that's the samskaras of having these pious samskaras, to see that there is a glory in sacrifice and in charity. So very interesting then that as we see what Bali Maharaj did, he then understood that if I want to be glorious, the greatest glory that is obtainable is in sacrificing everything for Krishna, having this opportunity to go down in the world, to become famous as that king who gave everything. He conquered the world and then he gave it in charity, which is very glorious. And that's the thing that moved him. Very interesting. So all of us actually have to do that. You have to sometimes engage and understand how even your material conditioning, how the things that move you, even now in a material sense, can be utilized within the service of Krishna and propel you forward. We see, honestly, I have to tell you, many people who are wonderful, who are great book distributors, are also oftentimes people, like for example, not everyone, but some of them are people that are very competitive, and therefore when we read the book scores, or when there's this idea of becoming the #1 book distributor, they're moved by it. And Prabhupada actually encouraged it. He's the one who created this whole spirit of friendly competition between temples because he knew this is America. And, American people want to be number one. They're moved by the desire to be the best. And, then it's like, oh, let's engage it. Let's engage that spirit as a motivational force within Krishna consciousness. And obviously, Prabhupada's thing was, it's very interesting because devotees were asking him about this competitive spirit. And then Prabhupada said, no, it's even in the spiritual world, there's a competitive spirit. There's a competition that also goes on amongst the devotees. But the difference is that there's no envy. That is, the envy is the thing that makes you see, oh, now it has become material. Now it has become, now my gratification comes at the cost of others. But even in the spiritual world, there's a spirit of competition. So we see that the various classes of people, various castes, they're moved by certain different desires. And we have to sometimes also go onto that platform of understanding what is it that you want. Do you want knowledge? Are you really interested in knowledge? Well, then surrender to Krishna is also, that's how you will get so much knowledge. Like, even for myself, I have to say that I really like writing. I like writing a lot, and I like thinking. And I don't really, in the beginning of Krishna consciousness, I really struggled to identify with going out on the street and singing in public. Number one, I didn't even sing in private. I was not a singer. I didn't really like music so much. I didn't even listen to music when it was just, it's a little difficult for me. And even in Krishna consciousness, sometimes the musical instruments are also so jarring, like wampers, I really must say, I don't like wampers. I really have a difficulty with and somehow opening my heart to them. I find it very loud and jarring. And going onto the street, singing in public is very difficult for me because I never did something like that in public. I'm not a public person into public displays of anything really. But I have to say, I did a Harinam a few times, and I always found that after a Harinam, my mind is just so fresh and buzzing. And I can have somehow, if I write or if I think after a Harinam, it just comes to me. Even a Ratha Yatra, I find Ratha Yatra one of the most intellectually stimulating experiences. When you go in front of the chariot and you just pull the chariot, and somehow there's just all these ideas, and it's like the spiritual vision that comes to you as you're looking at the world. So many things I'm thinking. So to tell you the truth, I go to a Ratha Yatra to think, believe it or not. I go there and I stand in front of the chariot because I have faith that Anandam Buddhivan Vidya Bhadu Jivanam, the holy name, is the life breath, the life of transcendental knowledge. And somehow by getting absorbed in the holy name, I receive all these interesting insights and knowledge because that's what I like. So, and now, but it's material. It's like before Krishna consciousness, I was also into that. I was into anything that would stimulate my mind, stimulate my thoughts. And, therefore why did I smoke marijuana for so many years? Because that's what I thought. You smoke some dope and then you think and then you can write and all these things. So now somehow when it's transpose and say, wow, actually, if even my material motivation can be engaged in the sacrifice of performing, chanting the holy names. So it's just a simple example of engaging one's material conditioned motivation and funneling that properly into the sacrifice of Krishna consciousness. And that helps. It really does actually help. And it's not artificial, because it's true. All desires are fulfilled by sacrificing to Lord Vishnu. Everything that you want will be fulfilled. You just have to understand it and see how it is engaged in that way. And understand that if you are somehow seeing that there's a difference between your own interest and Krishna's interest, and on any level, both materially and spiritually, it means that your vision is too small. It means your vision is too tiny. You're not broad-minded enough to see that big picture. And as you see this bigger picture, you will see that everything becomes fulfilled in the service of Krishna. Prabhupada made the example once. He was saying how he had so many family members, and his father, Prabhupada's father, was a pure devotee, and he was very encouraging to people to just pick up, to serve Krishna with your full energy. And like we see that they wanted to send Prabhupada to study to become a lawyer in England. And his father said, no ways, he doesn't want his son to go there and just, lose his devotional roots. And, he wanted him to rather live a simpler life. And I mean, he still went to college, and it was, but at the same time, he didn't go to England and do the whole thing because his father saw what happened to the people who went to England and studied there, and they just start wearing, coat and pants and start drinking, whatever it is. So, but Prabhupada said that only him and his sister only Prabhupada and his sister Pashima. They were the only two ones that really took very seriously to Krishna consciousness. The rest of his family members, they were sort of into it, but like most people, it's a phenomenon in the world. The majority of religious people are passive supporters. They say, oh, this is very good, but they're not going to do anything really personally. So he said that my family members, my brothers and sisters, they didn't want it. They just wanted to be, comfortable and peaceful and just have a nice life. And he said, and now they're all dead. But me and my sister, who were all interested in serving Krishna more seriously, says, actually, we are living the longest. We are having the best health, and we are actually having the most wonderful life. Like, we are having the experience to go all over the world and have so many things. So probably saying very interesting. Like, we just gave everything to Krishna in the end. We had a more, even on a material level, better health and more prosperity than even the rest of my brothers and sisters. So it means to have that vision, to see how everything fits in, and have that faith that somehow by giving to Krishna, then all good things will result. And that is the basic principle, the premise of Krishna consciousness. And here in Bali Maharaj's case, a very interesting angle to see how someone who is not a pure devotee, who is not moved purely, you see some people, if you become very pure in heart, pureness of heart means your motivation, you are moved by the pure motivation of simply to love Krishna. That actually moves you, can move you sufficiently into action. But that is not very easy, to tell you the truth. It is very difficult to be moved by love, because our hearts are hard, steel-framed hearts. So hearts that are impervious to be penetrated by the motivation of love. And in actual fact, we protect ourselves from loving. Because if you love, you become, in one sense, vulnerable. Because if you love Krishna fully, it means that then life becomes very risky. Because then who knows where this love will take you. And we see, if you fall in love, then you do the craziest things. So love is a very dangerous thing, especially when you love Krishna and the spiritual master. So we protect ourselves from it, because it can cause all kinds of disruption in life. So therefore our hearts are very hard, steel-framed. But we also have to find our way to connect with the process of Krishna consciousness. And most of us, that's what we have. We might not have love. Sometimes it comes a little bit. But what we have is some faith in the process of Krishna consciousness. We have faith in hearing the Bhagavatam and chanting the holy name. So in the intermediary stage of Krishna consciousness, you have to somehow engage whatever faith you have and other motivations in that process. And even if you think about the other pastime that we see in the 8th canto of the Bhagavatam, is the churning of the milk ocean. And there the exact same phenomenon takes place, but on a cosmic scale. The churning of the milk ocean was taking place, and who was churning? On both sides, there was the demigods and the demons, and they were both pulling. So both of them were pulling, one on the one side, one on the other side. And similarly, even in our own consciousness, as our own consciousness is churned in the process of purification, we also will pull it, sometimes by mundane desire and sometimes by divine desire. But somehow that process has to continue going. So if you have to be motivated by the desire for fame or whatever it is, no problem. Just whatever gets you going, whatever gets you gets the gears running. And also we see that Bali Maharaj, he was blessed by this vision of being able to see that there's something beautiful in sacrifice. And that also has to be there. We have to be able to see that sometimes we will be undergoing difficult experiences in our life. And also, you always undergo difficult experiences. Like, difficulties will come in any case. But so when we connect with spiritual vows, spiritual principles, it means that then we, in one sense, focus our life on certain things. We put certain parameters in place, and we say that, yes, this is now the vows within which I live, the boundaries of my life. And in order to maintain those vows, then definitely some sacrifice will have to be there. That's how it goes. But it's just, any vow is like that. Once you get married, immediately so much sacrifice will have to be there to honor that vow, to honor the vow of what marriage requires. If you become a brahmachari, same thing. Then so much sacrifice will have to be there to maintain that vow, that identity. So the moment that there is some commitment, there will be some sacrifice needed to support it. But what is essential for any person who is interested in making that commitment is to be able to see that there is some beauty in making that sacrifice to honor that commitment. You have to somehow be able to see it, even if it's very difficult and very painful. You have to see that there's beauty in it. Otherwise, otherwise we are not moved by it. So this beauty is quite necessary to be able to perceive. And Bali Maharaj somehow he had that vision to see that this is something wonderful, and all of us have to also be able to be open to that experience. And in this way, it becomes much more meaningful. Like even you sometimes see people say even reading the Bhagavatam, making a vow to read the Bhagavatam every day, and even those days where you are really not wanting to read, or where you're really spaced out, but you honor that agreement. Like even if you have to stand upright so you can stay awake, and even if you don't remember everything afterwards, even there is something beautiful there, because if you have fulfilled your commitment, you have fulfilled your obligation. So in this way, that samskara of that impression, or that conception of being able to see the beauty of commitment and sacrifice is really a very wonderful thing. And it is something that will take you higher, take you to higher statuses of development, and will also greatly protect you because one regret comes at the end of life, and your regret will come for those moments where you abandoned your principles for immediate or short-term benefit. And when you look back at those days, and you will think, if I can just go back and change things, I'd be willing to make that sacrifice. Whatever it means, to have saved the failed marriage, to save the failed spiritual life. So regret is one of those things that come at the end. And this ability to sacrifice and see the beauty in it, it will help us to minimize that regret. And what is more wonderful than that? A life in which you look back and you have no regrets. That is real opulence. That is a real wonderful life. So and Bali Maharaj shows us that it's possible, even for us who are not fully pure in heart yet, to be at least moving in the right direction for living a life without any regrets. So this year, I see Parashuram posted a question. Maybe you can read it to me, Prabhu, because I'm struggling to access it. You're on mute.
This was sent to me. I wasn't sure if it's a question or a statement, but you can you can see you can give your comments on it. Though it's good to start with motivations which aren't pure, however, those same motivations hinder our surrender.
Yes, that is a fact. That is also a fact. So one has to be careful. One has to obviously move up. So, like, I listened to a class the other day. It's very interesting. One person was saying how it was a very senior devotee was speaking, and he was speaking to one of his godbrothers. And then that godbrother had recently started to take the position of a spiritual master, initiating spiritual master. And he said he always wanted to do it because it just seemed like the highest thing you can do. It seemed like that's the most important thing that can be done. And he says actually it was mixed with a little bit of desire for prestige in one sense. He thought, that's what he said out of his humility. And he said it but then he started to take disciples, and he realized, my God, this is such hard work. And now that the whole desire is gone, but now he sits with that responsibility, and now he says, now he's getting purified. The same thing happens with people who want to have children. Also happens like that. You have this desire, and it's a material desire, actually. Just the desire. Everyone, it's not a bad desire, but it's material. Animals also have it. They also have the desire to have children and take care of them. It's a very biological, primal drive. There's nothing spiritual about it. It's just something that comes with the body. But then you see, once you have those children, and then so much sacrifice has to be there. So the point is that the sacrifice is what purifies you. And therefore, if you can just properly be engaged, then naturally the sacrifice will happen. So therefore, like if you say, okay, like you can see it sometimes many people, kids, younger devotees, they want because they're accustomed by celebrity culture and music. So we glorify, and then in Krishna consciousness, it's funneled into the kirtan scene. So then, if you want to be a rock star in Krishna consciousness, then you have to get into kirtan. So then we see even many of our kirtan people, they also look like celebrities. Sometimes look like pirates, all kinds of tattoos and rings and all kinds of stuff. It's sort of like engaging that part of thing and funneling into Krishna consciousness. And then you see these guys, they play that mridanga drum like anything. They play it like they really practice like anything, and they're really into it. And it's mixed. It's motivated by the idea of sitting there playing the mridanga. But then what happens at the end? You practice that mridanga so hard, and then at the end, then you have to sit in kirtan for like 2 or 3 hours if you become a good drummer. And then you're forced to sit there and like you have to focus on the holy name for 2 or 3 hours. And if you space out, then the kirtan leader is going to look at you and say, hey, what's happening? You suck. And then they're going to substitute you with someone else. So then you will be forced to sit there for so many hours and chant. So the point is that it is the sacrifice and the process that purifies us. And with time, we become able to relinquish these other lower motivations. But as we have to remember, it only works if there is no envy. If there is envy added as an agreement, as an ingredient, then there will be no benefit. So then there's not benefit. Then the whole thing is spoiled, because then you will ruin. You will not be able to please Krishna by that sacrifice, and therefore it will be ruined. So one has to therefore be careful about that. That's a fact. Envy cannot be engaged in Krishna consciousness. But if there's some mundane thing that moves us, the process will then purify us. But it is our responsibility to keep envy very distant. And as long as envy is distant and we're engaging in the process, then we will get purified. And Krishna will make arrangements to purify us. And you've seen it in the life of many people that sometimes Krishna makes some special arrangements to purify us of specific motivations that we might have. And but that is done out of love. And we don't have to worry so much. It is important that we don't have to become our own doctors. You don't have to diagnose your own disease and give yourself your own medicine. Your responsibility is simply Nityam Bhagavata Sevya, is to perpetually stay connected with the process of devotional service, and then just avoid envy within the heart. And then the process will purify you. Jayadvaita Maharaj has a saying, his teacher in school used to say always, it all comes out in the wash. Everything comes out. One simply has to stay connected. And therefore envy is that problem, because envy is this thing that will break the connection. So yeah, that's some thoughts on that. But if one is able, as to also be said, at a certain point, if one is able to give up a lower motivation, then it's also a wonderful moment. If you can do that, it's very nice actually to do that. And that also comes at certain points when one has to choose. One has to make those decisions. And it can be very challenging, but it can be nice. But Krishna sets up these situations where we can choose. Like when I just came to America, I came from a very nice place actually. I had a wonderful, I was in South Africa, and I was preaching in the same place that I grew up in, and at the university I studied, and many of my friends, they all became devotees. So even my friends before Krishna consciousness, there was a whole group of about 10 of us that all sort of joined together in different degrees of seriousness. And we all lived, many of us, we lived together in a house. So it was quite nice. We're all like guys, 3 of us went to the same high school, and we're all just living together in a little Krishna conscious happy land, because, it's all people that I know well and that I was accustomed to. And it was very wonderful. We had a wonderful little Krishna conscious time there. And then at a certain point, my spiritual master, he just wanted me to come here to this place. And it was such an interesting experience. And because in the past, for me, Krishna consciousness and material happiness at that point had run track to track. I was living with the people that I wanted to live with and doing what I was wanting to do in any case. But it was Krishna conscious, it was there. And it was the first time really that there was this kind of separation, where now I had to go somewhere and leave behind my friends, even though they're all devotees, and come to a new place that I wasn't really sure what will happen. And it was interesting. I had this peculiar experience. I was like, wow, now Krishna is asking me to come to a higher level of motivation. And it's very interesting when that happens. And then the irony is then you actually don't lose anything, because then you just develop new friends and your world becomes bigger. at least in my case, I've got a new family in one sense now here in New York City, and it's been very wonderful so far. But I'm just sharing that experience of sometimes where you see Krishna comes and he says, okay, now's the time that you move to a higher motivation. And but he does that, and it's not our job really to be so concerned about that. Any other questions or comments from anyone? Gorshan.
Thank you, Prabhu. I also wanted to ask something. However, like I'll also open it up for other devotees. If they want to add a comment or a question, please feel free to do so. You can unmute yourself.
You can ask your question, Gorshan.
So, because like even though like we all like Rupa Goswami has given a process like how everything starts from Shraddha and each person goes through, all of us go through those stages. So it sounds very scientific. However, we also see not everyone's life is is the same. How they go through and what can happen in between is not like exactly sure.
Definitely.
So what actually determines our path? Even though we are all in the same path, individually we still have like a personal experience. So what is that which defines? Is it karma? Because it's not active in devotion service. It in what?
Well, I mean, if you look at the 8th chapter, the 7th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, Krishna really explains. Somehow I've never been able to remember this verse, but it is a good one. And it says that this is text number 27, I believe. No, 28. Yesham tvantakatam papam jananam punya karmanam te dvandva moha nirmukta bhajante mam vidavata. Which says that persons who have acted piously in previous lives and in this life, and whose sinful reactions are completely eradicated, are freed from the dualities of delusion, and they can engage themselves in my service with determination. Very interesting. The Prabhupada says here that one has to have a background of pious activities. It's practically actually required to do what? To be able to be determined enough to stick to the process of Krishna consciousness. So it's an interesting, one would say, relationship between our conditioning and between our ability to stay connected to the process of Krishna consciousness. Now, ultimately, it is a fact that it is about Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur. He comments on that verse and he says, what is those pious activities that Krishna is speaking about here? What are those pious activities that are supposed to be the background that will help us become determined in Krishna consciousness? Because that's really what you're speaking about. The question is about our determination. You see, it's like your life happens to you, and the question is, will you stay connected to the process of Krishna consciousness? What the individual life is, that is what it is. It goes this, it goes this. But we can see that happiness or distress, both of them can break your determination in Krishna consciousness. Too much distress, too much suffering, and then boom, you can't do it, and then you have to sort out your material issues. Too much happiness, same thing. Then you're like, oh, I don't know, I don't really need Krishna consciousness at the moment. Everything is just so perfect. So you will just have a mixture between happiness and distress. But for the undetermined, both of these things will destroy your connection with Krishna consciousness. So really the thread that is drawn to the devotee's life is the question of determination. How determined are you to stay connected to the process? And if that determination is there, then we see that that's what determines your path, as you were saying. If the strong determination is there, one will move through all these challenges. And as Lisa Krishna says, that determination is based in Janana Punya Karmanam, on many, many lives of pious activity. But then what is that pious activity? What is that pious activity? Vishnu Chakravarti says it is the association of devotees. That is the root pious activity that will somehow generate enough determination in us to be able to stay connected. And that we have done for how many lives? That we have done, and we're all different in how much lives and background we have in being connected with the devotees. So Prabhupada makes a point in some purports that a general pious life, like mundane piety, makes it more possible to take advantage of the association of devotees. And that we have seen. If you are generally a pious person, when you meet devotees, it's a much closer gap to go to. Prabhupada says if you're foolish, atheistic, or evil or cruel, then you meet the devotees, you won't be able to take their association. So somehow entering into the association of devotees, it helps if there's some piety. And then that continual association, that Sangha with devotees. And that's what differentiates all of us. And that we all have varying amounts of Sangha with devotees, and therefore varying amounts of determination. And the solution is then simply to somehow stay connected again. And it's that base connection of being able to stay connected to the process. And because the entire growth of going through these various 9 phases of devotional service is resting on that determinative ability. And we also know that we can see that at a certain point, it is as one, if your real close circle of people in your life, that circle can we all have many different relationships, and we have like various rings of people that are connected to our life. And but if that close circle can become fully devotional, if your close circles can all be those individuals that are really also on the path of devotional service, then one is quite safe in one sense. Because then if you would abandon your connection with Krishna consciousness, you would harm your relationship with your close friends. And therefore that keeps us actually quite safe. And I have to tell you that many times I've spoken to quite a few devotees, and that's the thing, like we're like, now all my best friends are devotees, so I can't really, where can I go? I can't go anywhere. And in that way, it is that Sangha that is the root pious activity. Okay, see, it is 8 o'clock here. Also have to jump. I thank you very much, Skorsaran, for inviting me again and getting